The preparation rooms beneath Westminster Abbey smelled of cold stone and candle wax, the way they always did in the days before something enormous was about to happen. Thomas Holt had been assigned to document security for 3 years, long enough to know that the silence inside these rooms was never truly quiet. It breathed. It pressed against the walls with the weight of everything that had happened here before and everything that was about to happen again. It was the 14th of May, 1937. The coronation of King George VI was 48 hours away. Holt was not a senior man. He held the rank of junior ceremonial guard, which meant, in practical terms, that he was trusted with tasks senior men considered beneath their attention. Cross-referencing distributed documents against master copies, checking that officiants had received correct versions of the order of service, confirming page counts, confirming seal impressions, confirming that the words inside matched the words that were supposed to be inside. It was precise, invisible work. Holt didn't mind it. He had what his mother called a machine memory, the kind that photographed pages rather than reading them, the kind that noticed when a comma had moved 3 words to the left or when a paragraph break had been quietly shifted by half an inch. He had been recruited specifically for this quality, though no one had ever said so directly. They had simply placed him in rooms with important documents and waited to see what he noticed. Tonight, working alone at a long oak table with 2 oil lamps and a growing stack of verified pages beside him, he noticed something that made him set down his pen very carefully and sit completely still for almost 30 seconds. The document in front of him was a distribution copy of the official coronation order of service, one of 14 that had been prepared for senior officiants and palace ceremonial officers. He had been cross-referencing it against the master copy, which sat in a sealed leather binder to his left, its pages marked with the Lord Chamberlain's stamp and dated the 3rd of April, 1937. Page 7 of the distribution copy read differently from page 7 of the master. Not dramatically, not in a way that would have struck most people as significant. The wording was formal in both versions, carefully constructed, the kind of language that took months of committee work to produce. But where the master copy contained a specific passage acknowledging the transfer of sovereign duty following the abdication of King Edward VII, the distribution copy contained a reworded paragraph that spoke only of the natural progression of royal succession, with no mention of abdication, no mention of Edward, no acknowledgement of the circumstances that had placed George VI in this position at all. Holt checked it twice, then a 3rd time. He turned to page 11. The master copy contained a liturgical note referencing the unique nature of this coronation, a king ascending not by the death of his predecessor, but by an act of extraordinary personal renunciation. The distribution copy contained a standard succession notation, identical to those used for every coronation since George V. Page 15. The master copy included a formal acknowledgement of the transition of the burden of crown language that had been specifically requested, according to the marginal notes, by the Archbishop of Canterbury himself. The distribution copy contained a generic blessing with no such acknowledgement. Holt sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the preparation room, where the stones were so old they had turned the color of old teeth. His mind was running the comparison automatically, the way it always did, pages stacking against pages with perfect mechanical fidelity. Someone had rewritten the coronation order of service. Not all of it, not even most of it, just the parts that told the truth about how George VI had come to be king, the parts that acknowledged the weight of what had been passed to him, the parts that said, in careful ceremonial language, that this man had not sought this crown, had not expected it, had not been prepared for it, and was carrying it anyway because duty had arrived at his door and asked him to. Those parts were gone. In their place was a clean, confident narrative of seamless royal succession, the kind that implied inevitability, that implied a king who had always been destined for the throne, that implied nothing unusual, nothing reluctant, Nothing human about any of it. Holt checked the seal on the distribution copy. It was perfect, indistinguishable from the master. The paper quality was identical. The typography was flawless. Whoever had done this had done it with access to the highest level of production resources, and had done it carefully enough that a casual reader, even an experienced one, would have noticed nothing at all. He looked at the stack of 13 remaining distribution copies waiting for his cross-reference check. His stomach tightened. He pulled the second copy toward him and opened to page 7. It matched the first distribution copy, not the master. He checked the third, the fourth. By the time he had confirmed the substitution across all 14 distribution copies, the oil in his left lamp had burned a quarter-inch lower, and his hand was completely steady, because Thomas Holt had a gift for remaining calm in proportion to the severity of what he was seeing. The worse the thing, the stiller he became. He closed the last copy and aligned all 14 into a neat stack. Then he picked up the master binder, tucked it under his arm, and walked to the door of the preparation room. In the corridor outside, a senior valet was moving quickly toward the linen storage with an armful of ceremonial cloth. Holt stopped him. "I need to speak with the ceremonial security officer," Holt said. The valet barely slowed. "Which one? There are 4 on rotation tonight." "The senior officer." "That would be Major Clifton. He's in the north sacristy coordinating vestment placement. You'll need to go through his aide first, Corporal Davies. Davies is in the east corridor near the chapter house, but he's likely with the Verger team right now." Holt nodded and moved toward the east corridor. The running had begun. Corporal Davies was not in the east corridor. He was, according to a choir master Holt encountered near the chapter house door, currently in a meeting with the head verger and 2 representatives from the Lord Chamberlain's office about the precise sequencing of the processional movement. He would be available in approximately 40 minutes. Holt considered his options. 40 minutes was not available time. He had no way of knowing whether the substituted copies had already reached their intended recipients. If they had, and if those recipients began preparing their ceremonial rolls using the altered text, the corrections would need to happen at the level of personal instruction, one officiant at a time, which was a different kind of problem entirely. He retraced his steps to the preparation room, retrieved the stack of distribution copies, and carried them back under his other arm. Then he walked to the main ceremonial coordination office on the ground floor of the Abbey's administrative wing, where, he knew from 3 years of document work, there was a duty log that listed every senior officer's current location updated at 15-minute intervals. The duty log confirmed that Major Clifton had moved from the north sacristy to the presbytery to supervise the placement of the coronation chair, that Corporal Davies was still in the chapter house meeting, that Colonel Reginald Ashby, head of ceremonial security for the entire coronation, was listed as present in the coordination office itself. Holt looked up from the log. Colonel Ashby was sitting 12 feet away at a large desk covered in route maps and timing schedules, a cup of tea growing cold at his elbow, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking like a man who had not slept properly in 4 days and had made peace with that fact. Ashby was 61 years old, lean and deliberate, with the kind of face that had heard every possible variety of pre-event crisis and had learned to sort them by severity in the first 10 seconds. He had supervised ceremonial security for 3 royal funerals, 2 jubilees, and 1 previous coronation. He was not easily alarmed. He was also, Holt knew from careful observation, not easily dismissed. Holt crossed the room, set the master binder and the stack of 14 distribution copies on the desk in front of Colonel Ashby, and said, without preamble, "Sir, the distribution copies don't match the master. Pages 7, 11, and 15 have been substituted across all 14 copies. The substitutions remove all references to the abdication and the transfer of sovereign duty. They were produced to the same standard as the originals. All 14 are affected. Ashby looked at him over his reading glasses for exactly 3 seconds. Then he set down his pen, pulled the master binder toward him, and opened it to page 7. He read it once. Then he picked up the nearest distribution copy and opened it to page 7. He read that once. He set both documents flat on the desk, side by side, and stared at them the way a man stares at something he was hoping very much he would not see. "How long ago did you find this?" he said. His voice was completely level. "Approximately 35 minutes ago, sir." "Have any of the copies reached their recipients?" "I don't know, sir. I came directly to you after confirming the substitution across all 14. Ashby stood up. He moved to the door of the coordination office, opened it, and spoke to someone in the corridor in a voice too low for Holt to hear. Then he came back to the desk and looked at the documents again with the expression of a man reorganizing his understanding of the last several hours. "Who else has touched these copies tonight?" "I received them from the distribution clerk at 8 o'clock for cross-reference verification. I was the first to open them for checking." Ashby picked up the distribution copy and held it at an angle under the lamp, examining the paper quality, the seal, the binding. His expression did not change, but his jaw tightened slightly. "This was not produced outside these walls," he said quietly. "The paper is Abbey stock. The seal press is the Lord Chamberlain's official instrument. Someone with significant access did this." "Yes, sir." Ashby looked at him directly. "You're certain of the discrepancy. You're not reading a draft version against a final." Holt opened the master binder to the inside cover and pointed to the Lord Chamberlain's certification stamp, dated the 3rd of April, marked final approved text, countersigned by the Archbishop's office. Then he pointed to the identical certification stamp on the distribution copy, marked with the same date, the same countersignature. "The stamps are the same," Holt said. "The text inside is not." Ashby sat back down. He picked up his pen, not to write, just to hold, the way some men hold things when they are thinking at full capacity. Someone had gone to extraordinary effort to make 14 copies of a falsified coronation order of service, authenticated to the standard of the original, and had inserted them into the distribution process so seamlessly that they would have been delivered, used, and read aloud inside Westminster Abbey without a single person realizing the words being spoken were not the words that had been approved. A coronation built on edited truth. The thought settled into the room like cold air under a door. "Right," Ashby said finally. He stood again, with the decisive movement of someone who has finished thinking and started acting. "Collect every copy. Lock them in the document safe in this office. Give me the master binder. And then you're going to stay exactly where I tell you, because I'm going to need someone who can recite page 7 from memory in front of people who will want to argue about it." Holt gathered the 14 copies without a word. He could already recite all 3 substituted pages verbatim, both versions. Lord Edmund Graves occupied a temporary office in the Abbey's South Administrative Wing, a room that had been assigned to him in his capacity as Senior Advisory Counsel to the Palace Ceremonial Committee. He was 67 years old, immaculately dressed even at this hour, with a scholar's hands and a diplomat's eyes, the kind of man who had spent 40 years understanding exactly how much power resided in the precise selection of words. He did not appear surprised when Colonel Ashby entered his office at 11:47 in the evening. He appeared, if anything, mildly resigned, the expression of a man who had known a conversation was coming and had used the intervening time to prepare for it thoroughly. Ashby set the master binder and a single distribution copy on Graves' desk and opened both to page 7 without speaking. Graves looked at them for a long moment. Then he folded his hands on the desk in front of him. "I assume you're here to tell me this constitutes a breach of protocol," he said. "I'm here to ask you to explain it," Ashby replied. Holt stood near the door, the document safe key in his pocket, saying nothing. Graves leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling briefly, the gesture of a man deciding how much of his reasoning to share. When he looked back down, his voice was measured and entirely without apology. There are 14 foreign delegations attending this coronation. Representatives from France, from Germany, from the United States, from 6 Commonwealth nations. Every one of them will be reading or hearing some version of that order of service. Every one of them will carry an impression of this monarchy back to their governments. The abdication was a crisis. It was a failure of the institution at precisely the moment when this continent requires the institution to project absolute stability. Removing those references does not falsify history. It frames the present. There is a significant difference. Ashby's voice did not rise, is there. The monarchy's authority is not diminished by acknowledging what happened, Graves. It is diminished by pretending it didn't. The public ceremony is not a history lecture, Graves said, and for the first time there was an edge in his voice. It is a performance of continuity. King George did not ask for this crown. We are all aware of that. But the moment he accepted it, the manner of its arrival became irrelevant to the function he now serves. Reminding 14 foreign powers that this king was second choice, that his brother ran from his duty, that the throne was passed like a burden no one wanted, serves no one. Not the king, not the country, not the institution. Ashby let the silence sit for several seconds before he replied. It serves the truth, he said, and in this particular case, the truth was approved by the Lord Chamberlain, countersigned by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and certified as final on the 3rd of April. You substituted it without authorization from either office. Graves looked at him steadily. I have the authority of the Ceremonial Advisory Committee. The Ceremonial Advisory Committee advises. It does not certify. It does not substitute. And it does not rewrite an order of service 48 hours before a coronation without the knowledge of the officiants who will be speaking the words. There was a long pause. I made a judgment, Graves said finally, in service of the crown. Ashby picked up both documents from the desk. Then he said, quietly and with complete finality, the crown will now make its own judgment. He nodded once to Holt, and they left the room. In the corridor, Holt matched Ashby's pace without being told to. Neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. Then Ashby said, without turning his head, he's not wrong about the foreign delegations. No, sir, Holt agreed. Ashby walked 3 more paces, but he's wrong about everything else. The king was not asleep. This was not surprising to anyone who knew him. George VI had not been sleeping well since December of the previous year, when the weight of what was coming had settled onto him with a permanence he could neither negotiate with nor put down. He was 41 years old. He had spent his entire adult life preparing to support his brother's reign, to be the steady, quiet figure in the background, the dependable second, the man who would never need to be first. He had built his life around that understanding. He had arranged everything, his habits, his household, his sense of himself, around the quiet certainty that the crown was not his destination. Then December had arrived, and everything he had arranged had been rearranged by forces entirely outside his control. And here he was in a room inside Buckingham Palace at 12:30 in the morning, 2 days before his coronation, reading a letter from his daughter that she had slipped under his sitting room door before bed, because she had sensed, the way children sense these things, that her father needed something ordinary to hold onto. He was holding it when Colonel Ashby knocked. The equerry admitted Ashby and Holt without ceremony, correctly reading the colonel's expression as the kind that did not benefit from procedural delays. George VI set his daughter's letter on the side table and looked at the 2 men standing before him with the steady, quiet attention that had always been his most underestimated quality. People who expected the stammer to indicate an uncertain mind were consistently surprised by the clarity of the eyes above it. Ashby placed both documents on the low table in front of the king and explained the situation in precise, unembellished terms. the original approved text, the substituted distribution copies. Lord Graves stated reasoning. The 48-hour window before the ceremony. He spoke for 4 minutes without interruption and ended with a simple statement of the decision that required royal authority, which text would be used. The king picked up the master binder first. He read page 7 slowly, then page 11, then page 15. Then he set it down and picked up the distribution copy and read the same 3 pages. He set the distribution copy down and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Holt stood near the door and watched the king's face and understood, with the particular clarity that comes from being an unimportant person in an important room, that he was watching a man read a description of himself. The master copy described a king who had arrived unexpectedly, who carried a weight he had not anticipated, who was proceeding forward despite everything. The distribution copy described a king who had always been inevitable. One of these was true. The other was a kindness that cost more than it gave. "Your Majesty," Ashby said quietly after the silence had extended long enough, "Lord Graves' position is not without strategic merit. The foreign optics are a legitimate concern." The king looked up. His voice when he spoke was careful and unhurried, the deliberate pace of a man who had worked for years to make words obey him. "I am aware of Lord Graves' concern." He allowed a brief pause. "I'm also aware that every person inside Westminster Abbey the day after tomorrow will know precisely how I came to be standing there. The Archbishop knows. The peers know. The delegations know. The press corps knows. Everyone in that building will carry the full knowledge of the last 6 months into the ceremony with them." He looked at the distribution copy again. "If the words being spoken do not match the knowledge in the room," he continued, "then we are not performing a coronation. We are performing a correction. And a king who begins his reign by correcting history, even quietly, even with good intentions, has told everyone present exactly what kind of reign they should expect." He closed the distribution copy and pushed it gently to the side. "Use the original," he said, "every word of it." Then he picked up his daughter's letter from the side table and held it again, not reading it, just holding it, as if the small, ordinary weight of it balanced something larger. Ashby inclined his head. "Yes, Your Majesty." He gathered both documents and turned toward the door. The king spoke once more, not loudly, almost to the room rather than to them. "The man who wrote those substitutions believed he was protecting the crown. Tell him I understand that. Then send him home." Ashby paused at the door. "Understood, sir." "One more thing." He looked directly at Holt for the first time, with the particular attention of a man who had learned to see the people everyone else looked through. This young man found the discrepancy. "Yes, sir." The king nodded once, the kind of nod that carried no performance in it, just acknowledgement, clean and direct. "Good," he said. "That is exactly the kind of guard I need." Then he returned to his letter, and Ashby and Holt stepped back into the corridor, and the door closed behind them with the soft, definitive sound of a decision being sealed. The next 60 minutes were the quietest kind of busy. Ashby moved through the Abbey's administrative network with the efficiency of a man who had been running ceremonial security for 20 years and knew exactly which doors to knock on and in which order. The 14 falsified distribution copies were retrieved from the document safe, logged as withdrawn, and replaced with freshly printed versions produced directly from the master binder under Ashby's personal supervision. Each copy was hand-checked against the master, page by page, by both Ashby and Holt working at opposite ends of the long oak table in the preparation room. It took 41 minutes. Holt didn't speak during most of it. He worked with the focused, mechanical precision that the job required, cross-referencing each page against the master text that was by now so thoroughly lodged in his memory that he could have recited any passage from it without looking. Page 7 in the voice of the Archbishop. Page 11 in the voice of the senior herald. Page 15 in the voice of whoever had been assigned to read the liturgical notes, which he would need to verify in the morning schedule. At one point, around the 30th minute, Ashby set down his pen and said, without looking up from his page, "You know graves will not go quietly." "He has already gone, sir," Holt replied. The equerry's office confirmed his departure from the South Wing at 12:50. Ashby considered this. No scene, no formal objection. "None recorded, sir." Ashby returned to his page. He was a man who genuinely believed in this institution, he said. That counts for something. Holt kept his eyes on his own page. "Yes, sir. It's also what made him dangerous." Ashby looked up at that. He studied Holt for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same general territory. Then he went back to his work. By 1:30 in the morning, all 14 corrected copies were sealed, stamped, and logged into the distribution chain for delivery to their recipients at 6 o'clock the following morning. Standard pre-coronation timing. Entirely unremarkable. Nothing to suggest that anything had been different about this particular set of documents from any other. The falsified copies had been placed in a separate sealed archive case and logged under a classification notation that Holt didn't have clearance to read the full description of, but which he understood meant that the matter was considered closed at the institutional level and would not become a public record. Lord Graves would not be spoken of. Not tomorrow, not at the ceremony, not in any official account of the coronation's preparation. He would simply be absent, his absence unremarked upon by anyone who hadn't been in a position to notice it, which was almost everyone. That was how these things worked, not with announcements, with silence that meant something different from ordinary silence. Ashby locked the document safe and pocketed the key. He looked around the preparation room with the expression of a man confirming that every object was where it should be. The oil lamps had burned low. The long oak table was clear. The master binder sat in its leather case, sealed and certified, ready for its final journey to the Abbey in the morning. "Get some sleep," Ashby said to Holt. "You're on the processional line at 7. "Yes, sir." Ashby walked to the door and paused there, not turning around. "You'll want to remember this," he said. "Not the part with Graves, not the part with the king." He paused. "The part tomorrow when the ceremony goes exactly as written." He left without further ceremony. Holt sat alone in the preparation room for a few minutes after, not from any particular reason, just allowing the silence to settle around him, the way silence does after a very loud thing has happened quietly. The cold stone smell of the Abbey pressed in from all sides. Somewhere deeper in the building, a verger was moving through the nave checking the positions of processional markers, and his footsteps echoed up through the floor in a slow, steady rhythm. Holt thought about the king in his sitting room, holding his daughter's letter. He thought about a man who had read 2 descriptions of himself and chosen the one that was true, even though the true one was harder to carry. He thought about the words on page 7 of the master binder, the words that acknowledged the weight and the unexpectedness and the sheer human reality of a crown that had arrived without invitation. And he understood, in the way that quiet people understand things, that those words were not a weakness in the ceremony. They were the ceremony's entire point. They were what made it real rather than theatrical. They were what separated a coronation from a performance. He picked up his coat and the document's safe key, which he would return to Ashby in the morning, and walked toward the door. In the corridor, the same valet from earlier passed him with an empty tray, heading back toward the linen stores. "All sorted?" the valet asked, with the cheerful incuriosity of someone whose job had kept them too busy to notice anything unusual. Holt considered the question. "All sorted," he said. At 10:53 on the morning of the 12th of May, 1937, Thomas Holt stood at his position on the processional line inside Westminster Abbey, exactly where Ashby had placed him, 6 feet back from the south transept entrance, near enough to see the procession but not near enough to be visible in any photograph. The Abbey was full. Every seat occupied, every gallery crowded, every surface draped in the particular quality of ceremonial color that only existed in rooms built for moments like this one. The foreign delegations sat in their designated sections. 14 senior officiants held their orders of service. Every page matched the master. Every word was where it was supposed to be. The organ began. It filled the abbey from floor to ceiling, from the oldest stones to the highest vaulting, with the kind of sound that did not so much enter the ears as occupy the entire body from the inside. Holt felt it in his chest, in the soles of his feet, in the backs of his hands. The procession entered. And then George V.I. appeared at the head of it, walking forward with the particular quality of movement that Holt would think about for the rest of his life. Not the movement of a man who had always expected to be here, but the movement of a man who had arrived at a place he had not chosen and had decided with complete and quiet deliberateness to be equal to it. Every step carrying the full knowledge of how he had come to be taking it. No revision, no edited truth, just a man and the actual weight of the actual crown. The Archbishop raised his voice and began. The words on page 7 filled the abbey. Every one of them. Holt stood at his post and listened to the true version of the ceremony proceed exactly as written, and understood that the most important thing he had ever done in his career was something no one in this room would ever know about, and found that this was entirely, completely enough. Nobody knows who holds the line until the line holds. The organ played on. The crown descended. A king who had never expected this moment carried it forward into history, and the words that accompanied him were honest, and that honesty was the only foundation a reign could be built on that would not eventually crack beneath its own weight. Thomas Holt had not prevented a crime. He had not saved a life. He had saved the first true sentence of a king's story from being replaced with a more comfortable fiction. And in a room built for the weight of centuries, that was the only victory that mattered at all.